Good morning, everyone. Good morning, everyone. And thank you to all our audience today for tuning in to today's session on Master Speak. Last week, you heard Mr. Keith Coates, the futurist and global leadership expert on the show, talking about how leaders must engage in a different world to stay future fit. Today, continuing on the topic, we are happy to offer you another perspective by yet another inspirational global leader. The Master Speak is all about shaping your thoughts and helping you create an action plan by sharing global perspectives from some of the most noteworthy experts from around the world. I'm happy to introduce our speaker for today, currently professor at Indian School of Business. He's an outstanding communicator and a marketing and a strategy guru. Professor Doreswamy Nandkishore is a global C-suite executive with over 34 years of experience in leadership roles both in emerging and developed markets. His key areas of impact include turnaround situations and crisis management, transformation of old economy businesses with tech-based inputs and innovation, leadership, coaching in the new tech-led and sharing economy, emerging markets, and across cultural operations, sales, and distribution. Now, Nandu is actively involved in using his expertise and experience to help guide companies through this fast-changing world. But before I thank him for his participation on the show and invite him to speak, let me check if all of you who are watching this show and your families are safe and healthy. If you are, please click the like button on your screen so we know everything is good at your end. It's very important for us to know that. Let us know from which part of the country you're joining us from today. Do share that, your city, from where you're joining us in the town in the comment section. Now, if you want to invite somebody to join the session, please don't forget to tag him or her, your friend, your colleague, your partners, whosoever, in the comment section so that they get to know about this program and can join you on this journey. Lastly, most important as always, continue to share your comments and your questions in the comments box. We will filter your questions through the show, and I'm going to pick up a few questions that we can post to our speaker today. Two lucky questions at the end of the show will get gift vouchers from Amazon that we will ship to you after the end of the show. So please stay with us till the end of the show. Keep your questions coming, and you can get a shot at being the lucky winner for today. Okay, now without much ado, I'm going to hand over to Nandu to share his thoughts on the topic and all of us. Nandu, thank you for being with us today, joining us on Master Speak. We are all ears to hear from you.
Thank you, Rakesh, and hello, everybody. Thanks for that introduction. Let me just simplify that a little bit by saying I have worked in industry for almost 40 years now. So I was Darth Vader, now trying to be Yoda. Almost 30 years in Nestlé, including in CEO positions. I was the global CEO for Nestlé Nutrition a couple of years before I retired. And a lot of the people on this program who have spoken in the past are actually good friends. I know Rishad Tubakawala, I know Keith Coates. So it seems to be quite a close-knit community that you have tapped into to speak. So shall we get started? Can I request Ashish to put the slides up and then we can get started. I'll be speaking to you for about 20 to 30 minutes. And after that, we'll open up for questions and answers. That should give us sufficient time within the 1 hour that we have scheduled for the whole session. So next slide, please. So the key questions on our minds next are obviously, how long is this turbulence or crisis going to last? And this we don't know. Short answer, we don't know. And it requires a lot of scenario planning and preparation. It could last 2 months, it could last 2 years. And there's lots of benchmarks, lots of reasons why it should be one or the other, but they will all require different kinds of preparation. Next. So the questions, and let's put all the points on the chart, please, Ashish. So the questions are, what control do I have? What actions can I take? No, the previous chart. And are there any things that I should not be changing? So these are the three big questions on our minds. The control thing particularly is a bit of a heavy weight on our minds. So next chart, since Ashish is very fond of that. So this is a joke from a friend of mine who publishes cartoons, and he talks about what part of this can I blame on the pandemic. So if there's that friend you don't really want to see, or that boyfriend you really want to dump, this is a great occasion to do it. COVID-19, social distancing, that's a joke, by the way. Let's move on to the next slide. And talking about how long, first of all, how long is this crisis going to last? Next point. Ashish, maybe I request you to put all the points on the chart, because it'll be a lot smoother that way than my going, yeah. So first thing we need to realize is that turbulence is the new normal. Yeah, and it has been already for for the last few decades. We have seen that the amount of technological change in the environment has created new business models, has created new propositions. So the average life of a Fortune 500 company has been shrinking from 90 years in 1920. Today, it's down to about 15 or 16 years. And you look at the top 10 companies in the world, and you have all the usual tech suspects over there. There's Amazon, there's Apple, there's Facebook, there's Google, there's Netflix, and all of a sudden, the list of 30 years ago suddenly reads like half the companies don't exist. So Kodak doesn't exist, General Foods doesn't exist, General Electric is in deep trouble. So Xerox is not a shadow of what it used to be when I started working in 1980. So change has already been happening. Turbulence driven by changing global tech paradigms, but also social paradigms has already been the case. What COVID-19 is doing is it has created a black swan event that is going to accelerate some of those trends and slow down other trends. This COVID-19 crisis is not going to go away anytime soon. And indeed, if you look at the 1918 crisis, that came back a couple of times in a few waves, and it took 2 or 3 years for the world to get out of that. What we do know is that a vaccine is probably a year away before it's available to lay public, like you and me. Although there's some talk of vaccines being fast-tracked in Russia and so on. And this is probably going to be a transition event. The disruption is already there. There's a black swan event on top. This transition event is going to be something that people will talk about for the next 100 years. Next point, Ashish. So what's going to happen is there will be winners and losers depending on how people respond to this COVID crisis. If you look at the next chart, basically what's happening is, on the right of your chart, you have the potential winners industry-wise. On the left of your chart, you have the potential losers. This is a work done by I asked our bankers for this, and they gave this kind of a chart. But basically what they are saying is, anything that is consumed at home, whether it's hygiene products, whether it's food products, whether it's digital entertainment, digital education, or internet services, anything that's consumed at home, consumption has actually gone up. And companies are struggling with supply chain of how to make sure that they can feed the demand properly. Anything on the left of the chart, where the consumption is out of home, those sectors are severely stressed, whether it's travel, it's entertainment, it's leisure activity, it's restaurants. So there's a big dichotomy between sectors which are actually seeing a lot of growth at this point of time, including hygiene and pharmaceutical-led sectors, and sectors which are seriously stressed at this point of time. And your responses need to be different depending on which part of this equation you are in. And of course, when you're on the losing side of the equation, the out-of-home consumption scenario, it creates a lot of stress. So let's look at how one small restaurant in Australia adapted to this new crisis. Can we go to the next chart, please, Ashish, and play the video?
We have had to close all our restaurants for obvious reasons, for the coronavirus. So I thought to myself, hey, I know all my friends have got these import companies and they can get pasta and I can get sauces and I get all this stuff. And I converted this beautiful restaurant, which is really a beautiful restaurant, into a grocery store. Basically stock, quality and desire for people to come here and buy it, and to really invigorate the neighbours to say, right, they don't have to travel far to get really good quality food. We have to make the best of what we have, and what we can do is we can innovate, change, work with what we have and try and create something. That's the only thing we can do. Adapt. Work with what you have. Try and provide a service to your neighbours. Whatever space we have to just do whatever it takes to get them back to spend with us in different ways, I suppose. And that's all that we can do. So far, so good. And we've been able to maintain our staff.
Thank you, Ashish. So wasn't that a fabulous story from this lady? She's in the restaurant business, and the restaurant business is really stressed, as we saw in the previous chart, and how she has been able to pivot and look at the short-term stress that the business faces and convert her store to catering to an opportunity for people in the neighborhood, because of course they can't travel long distances to go to the supermarket anymore. It's her key message: adapt. Also, her attitude. She didn't sit there moaning about, oh my God, what happened and why did this happen and I have a high-end restaurant. She actually went out and tried to adapt her business model to keep short-term survival as the top priority. I find this a very inspiring story of how even small businesses can in fact respond to this positively and well. And even large businesses, when they are not able to respond, Hertz, for example, actually filed for bankruptcy in the US because they were not able to cope with the dramatic change of business model that happened. So thank you, Ashish, for prompting me to move to the next slide, which is the first step when a crisis happens is, of course, recognize there is a crisis. And that's what this lady did. She could have, like an ostrich, stuck her head in the sand, and that is a common response. A lot of people do tend to do that, and they are probably not the ones who are going to survive the crisis or do very well coming out of a crisis. Let's go to the next chart. So the first 5 rules of crisis management, and you can put all the 5 rules up there, Ashish. So number 1, recognize and accept the crisis. Don't be an ostrich. Also, don't panic. Number 2, in dealing with the crisis, get a crisis team in place, which includes a mix of competencies with relevant skill sets. Don't just get clones of yourself, because then you'll only get one particular way of looking at things. So get a relevant skill sets, including a communication expert, have a chairman, and start to prepare a legal record of all discussions that you do, because eventually these records, depending on the crisis, can even become a matter of something that's presented in court. Make sure in your crisis team, you appoint a devil's advocate to challenge the risk of groupthink. Most important, point number 4, when you enter a crisis, there is always this fog of war. There's uncertainty. There's all kinds of information floating around. First thing is to figure out what is a fact and what is an opinion. Both are important. Facts are important, opinions are important, but you need to know which is which. Okay? And within the facts, also identify what are the things you know and what are the things you do not know. And when you do not know something, you put a process in place to get that information. So understand your business impact, and focus on what you can control, like the lady from Sydney did. Now, the most important point, and this is why it's in bold here, is point number 5. Remind yourself of what are your core values and core strengths that you will not compromise when entering a major crisis like this, like the COVID-19 crisis that is happening. Because in the short-term survival, you don't want to do something that actually conflicts with your core values or your core mission or purpose or reason for existence as a company. So with that background, let's move to some other concepts. Let's move to the next chart. The first, this is a joke, again, a cartoon about how you might see petrol pumps adapting and offering hand sanitizers instead of petrol. But that's just a joke. Let's move to the next chart. The question that may be in your mind, as we said earlier, is what control do I have and what actions can I take? Let's start with the first point on control. And typically the thing is, oh my God, so much is changing. And the default tendency we tend to have is focus on, oh my God, so much is happening. COVID-19 is happening. I don't know how long it's going to last. I don't know when the government will lift the lockdown. I don't know when consumers will come back, customers will come back. And this can be overwhelming. Instead, start to make a list of what you can control and what you cannot control. So that's very important. Focus on what you can control and scenario plan for what you cannot. There you can build scenarios. I don't know how long the lockdown is going to last. So I'll build some scenarios and then see the implications. Next point, then look at what are the actions you can take based on what you can control. There's broadly 2 kinds of actions you can take. The first, whenever you face any crisis, the first is an action that treats the crisis as a threat. Second is an action that treats the crisis as an opportunity. And it's a very interesting here, the research-based theory here, which is the threat response typically says, I withdraw to my comfort zone, I cut costs, I just focus on short-term survival, I do what I know best. The opportunity response says, I go out and I chase the new opportunity and I try to create new opportunities. Now, the interesting thing here is Kodak. Kodak was the company who actually invented photography, going back more than 100 years. And in the late 1970s, they actually invented digital photography. Kodak were the pioneers in digital photography. And at some point in 1998, Kodak decided that there was no way to make money from digital photography. So they actually shut down the digital photography business unit. Before that, you remember those little SD cards? We all used to have them. You put them on our digital cameras and take photographs. Well, Kodak didn't make money from those. Kodak made money when you took that SD card to the shop and got them printed on paper. So they always were driving you back to the paper printing. And since very few people, mea culpa, I didn't either, actually printed those photographs, so they actually did not find this business model was sustainable. So in 1998, they said, we're going to close down digital photography. There's no way to make money from it. And we're going to go back into paper-based photography. How long did this business model last? Which was basically a survival threat, comfort zone response. 10 years later, Kodak didn't exist anymore. Fujifilm did the same thing, and they were a competitor. They said, we are not going to let Kodak outcompete us in paper, so we'll be the best in paper. At the same time, they said, we're going to take the skills and R&D capabilities that we have and see how we can apply it to other businesses. They looked for opportunities for the skill sets and competencies they had. So today, Fuji is a successful $20 billion multinational, which is in several businesses. They're big in paper photography. They're big in digital imaging, thin film technology, etc. So the learning comes, and next chart, there's a very interesting Chinese word for crisis. It's called Wei Qi. And next, so the first symbol is danger, and the second symbol is opportunity. Next, is opportunity. So the next chart, what we know from observing companies like Kodak, companies like Fujifilm, and other companies is the strategic response says, can we put all the points on the chart, please, Ashish? The strategic response says a successful response views the disruption as a threat and as an opportunity. Okay, what we're saying is, if you view it only as a threat, the Kodak response, chances are you will fail, because probably the disruption that is coming is going to drive your current business model out of existence and make it a dinosaur. So if you just keep focusing on your comfort zone, you may not survive very long. On the other hand, if you only chase the opportunity and you take your eyes off the current business, then competitors may eat your lunch, and the opportunity, you don't know which one's going to work. So you might lose both. So a successful response needs you to protect what you have today and invest in tomorrow's business models. And that's the opportunity response. So this is the important strategic insight in dealing with crisis. This is true for a company. It is also true for you as an individual. Yeah, when you're faced with this crisis, how do you respond to this as a threat? And how do you respond to this as an opportunity? And they both are actions that you have to take. Next chart. So combined with building operational flexibility. So if you can put all the points on the chart, please, Ashish, I'll then talk to this. So the story, no, the previous one, previous chart. Yeah, thank you. So the story is this. This goes back to 1998. And in 1998, I was at the time in Indonesia. And I don't know how many of you are aware of the Asean financial crisis. But in Indonesia, the Indonesian rupiah devalued. It used to be 2,000 rupiah to a dollar, and it devalued all the way to 17,000 rupiah in a dollar. And that change happened in 6 months. Imagine, just to get a parallel, if the Indian rupee is 70 rupees to a dollar today, imagine if it were to become 500 to a dollar by December. That's what happened in Indonesia. The country survived. But of course, there was a lot of pain because there was incredible inflation, because all commodities are benchmarked on global prices. A whole middle class suddenly found themselves moving into poverty. There was economic contraction. There was a great deal of stress on the economy and on society, of course, which then manifested itself as a coup against President Suharto. And there was, a change of government, etc., etc. I was in Nestlé at the time, and we were in Indonesia. And a lot of companies who face this kind of dramatic devaluation and stress, multinationals particularly, chose to leave the country and depart. Kellogg's, for example, left the country at that time, and they said it's not worth it. So in Nestlé, we stayed. What did we do? First of all, we did not lay off a single person. We took care of all our employees. And this was where we were demonstrating a commitment to our values and caring for people. Second, we made sure our products, we did not compromise on the quality. We maintained quality, and we worked very hard to develop backup supply chains, because obviously some supply chains were broken because of the ASEAN financial crisis. Then we made sure that these products were available, so the distribution system stayed viable. It meant we had to take price increases every 2 weeks because the rupiah kept falling, and we were taking price increase. It also meant we took salary increases to our people very, very frequently so that we could cope with the kind of inflation there was. Overall, it meant that our business that year actually declined. Our company business contracted by 25–30% in that year. Following that, the next year, the economy started to bounce back, and we bounced back with the economy. But because we had not run away, we had demonstrated our commitment, we were very well placed to ride the bounce back. So since then, every single year for the next 15, 16 years, our business bounced back, and we had record double-digit growth, top line, bottom line. So very quickly, our business recovered and surpassed the earlier levels that it was, and grew to become a $1 billion plus business in Indonesia. So that's that's what we did in this case. Again, threat response, opportunity response, combined with building operational flexibility to stay in business and make sure that we don't compromise our values. Remember rule number 5, values. Next chart, a different story now. And this is a story of fast forward a few years. And this is a story from 10 years in the future, which is the year 2009. And I was in Switzerland, and I was at the time the global CEO for the Nestlé Nutrition business, which is basically baby food and infant formula and things like that. And in France, we have these products that you can see on the slide in front of you, which is little jars of apple puree, carrot puree, and things like that. Now, these are glass jars. What happened was we discovered in our factory that there were a few broken pieces of glass. Now, we very quickly went in and figured out that the broken pieces of glass could only have come from one of the previous 2 batches of product that was produced. So we rushed to isolate those batches in the warehouses. Some had already gone to the customers. So we informed the authorities, we informed the customers, we went out, and we did a public recall. We told consumers, we said, listen, 2 batches are affected, return these 2 batches. So that recall happened very, very fast. Within a day or 2, we had all the product back. Nobody was hurt. Problem was resolved. But now the second problem started, which is on the next chart. Because this was already on social media, and in 2009, social media and Twitter were already a big thing. This started getting tweeted. So we had questions coming from Spain, from Portugal, from Italy, first of all, Europe, and then it spread across the pond. It went across the Atlantic and went to the US. And there's this Hollywood star called Alyssa Milano. I've never met her, but we've interacted on Twitter, and that's what I'm telling you. That's the story I'm telling you. So Alyssa Milano at the time had on Twitter 17 million followers, and she put out a tweet, and her tweet was, Nestlé is recalling baby food. In the US, Gerber is the baby food that is in fact owned by Nestlé. So please rush to return your Gerber jars to Nestlé, which was, out of the blue, and taking a problem in France, which was very local, and taking it completely in a different dimension. So I heard, and it was 8:30 at night, bad habit. I was in office on a Friday, and I got a call from Pete Blackshaw, who was the head of our digital unit. And he said, Nandu, we have a problem. Here, by the way, as an aside, here is the, you can call it the Nandu rule on Black Swan crisis, which is a real crisis always happen after 6:30 p.m. on a Friday evening before a long weekend. This is the Nandu rule on crisis, because I've lost count how many times we had some of the crises like this, some of which I can't talk about till today. So in this particular case, so 8:30 p.m., I got that call, and we responded to Alyssa Milano within 5 minutes, and we said, look, these are the facts. This is what actually happened. The problem was in France. It's only 2 batches. Recall completed. Everything is okay. No need to worry. And she was so gracious that within 5 minutes, she tweeted a retraction to her followers and said, listen, problem is solved. There's nothing wrong in the US. You're okay. So speed of response was very, very important in this kind of a case. The operational agility parts, the strategic response combined with the operational agility. So next chart, what we've talked about here, and put all the points on the chart, please. So we do need to know on the threat response, you need to act decisively. Speed is important, and you need to know what your core values and purpose are. Yeah, that you will not compromise. Know the facts, know the vulnerabilities, act quickly to stop the bleeding. That's important. The opportunity response, can I share with you an example of the next point here? The opportunity response, how do you lay the ground for recovery, and how do you capture new opportunities? So let's move to the next chart. And here's a story from 1 year after the Alyssa Milano incident. And this was, it was Christmas of 2010. And I was in India on home leave, and I was visiting my mother in Chennai, and I got a phone call from Chile. And our country manager in Chile, Ximena Corbo, she called me and said, "Boss, we have a problem." So I said, "What's the issue?" And in Chile also, we have these glass jars, apple purees, carrot purees, and stuff like that. So she said, "Listen, there is a local senator who is investigating companies and products, and he investigated our product, and he found that it was fully compliant as per local laws. Then he found it was fully compliant as per US FDA. It was fully compliant as per Codex Alimentarius, the international guidelines. But on one parameter, it was not compliant as per European Union norms, which is it contained trace elements of a pesticide called iprodione, which is allowed in the US and in Chile, but it's not allowed in Europe. So every country has its own laws of what's allowed, what's not allowed. So this is what happened. And you can argue saying, listen, but the product was fully compliant in Chile. Why should he benchmark you against European laws? So when he went to the government, the first thing the government said is that. When he came to Nestlé, the first thing we said, listen, the product is fully compliant as per local norms. What are you worried about? So his next question, and the politician, right? And you can see how politicians will argue. So he comes and says, so, Mr. Nestlé, are you telling us that European babies are more important than Chilean babies? Now, this is taking the whole argument to an emotional level, and it's a no-win place. So basically, we went to the government, and together with the government, we chose to recall these two batches. We went public and said these batches are fully compliant, but we're taking it back till we can fix the problem. And we launched the very creative name of Project Saturday. Comes from me because this crisis happened on a Saturday, not on a Friday, but it was a Saturday for me in India. It was a Friday for them in Chile. So it did happen on a Friday also for them. What we said was we look at all our formulations globally for all our baby care products and make sure that we match the highest standard parameter by parameter. If it's iprodione, it's zinc, it's whatever, by looking at US, European Union, local, etc., etc. So that was Project Saturday, where we made sure that something like this would never happen again. Somebody else would come and say, you're perfectly okay as per my national law, but you're not okay as per that other law. So, so we had to, so then obviously in the short term, we had lost business in Chile. We then had to come back. So we went to some farmers, we bought out their entire crop. We told them what pesticides they could use, what they could not use. We monitored their parameters and we sourced the crop from them, and we came back into the market in a year. And then we had to go back and tell consumers that our products were really good. So we chose to put our farmers, our consumers, and our quality control people on television to tell the story. And that's the next chart. Ashish, if you can play the TV video. This is one example.
Hola, mi nombre es Wilson Maldonado, agricultor de la octava región, y este es mi campo. El trabajo del campo es una mezcla entre pasión y profesionalismo. Hoy más que nunca podemos aprovechar las nuevas tecnologías para mejorar la eficiencia en la producción, ofreciendo así frutas y verduras 100% sanas y de la mejor calidad. Y es en este campo donde comienza el origen de los picados y colados Nestlé.
Colados y picados Nestlé, la mejor calidad del campo a cada frasco, reconocido por la Sociedad Chilena de Pediatría. Conoce más de esta historia en creciendojuntos.cl.
Thank you, Ashish. So what we found was 12 months after the crisis, after we had launched and after we had gone back with this very fact, but yet emotional communication, telling people what we were doing, consumers actually rewarded us for it. And our sales and market share actually rebounded to levels that were higher than what they were before the crisis. So next chart. So that's an example of crisis, threat, and opportunity. And if you can put all 5 points on the chart here, please, Ashish, to make it easy. So 5 more rules of crisis management. We talked about the first 5. Here are the next 5. First, number 6, identify your vulnerabilities. Number 7, communicate. Number 8, take action. Number 9, once the crisis is over, study and draw learnings. And most important, rule number 10, prepare before there is a crisis. And that includes putting crisis team and doing regular simulations on dealing with crisis. So the next chart has all 10 rules on it. And I will not take you through these. These will be in the handouts later. You can look at it. Ashish can share this one chart with you with the 10 crisis management rules. So you can look at these at your leisure. Let's move to some other points to discuss and explore the values dimension on finding your way through a crisis. Again, if you can put all the points on the chart here, it makes, thank you. So think back yourself to the last personal crisis that you faced before this COVID-19 crisis. What was your first response? And it's quite possible, and it's a human response. The first response is, why me, God? Why did this happen to me? And that's fine. And you know, it's quite common in life. We say, she is so lucky. You know, she is not lucky, or he's lucky, or, you know, or we say stuff like that, right? Why am I so unlucky? Why am I was lucky there? So what is this role of luck? How can we measure? How can we investigate this? We can't. On a personal level, it's very difficult because we all have selective memories. At a company level, it's easier to measure because every event that happens in the life of a company is reported in their annual report, in their press releases. These are reported. So Jim Collins, the author of Great by Choice, actually went out and did a study on this. And so for a company, just to explain, if my factory burns down, it's my bad luck, it's my competitor's good luck. If my competitor's factory burns down, it's his bad luck, it's my good luck. So it's easy to measure. What he found was over a 20-year time period, all companies had the same number of good luck events and the same number of bad luck events. Okay. Why then were some companies great and other companies did not do well? And he said the difference is not the number of good luck events or the number of bad luck events that happen, but what did you do when the event happened? Were you prepared for it? When your competitor's factory burned down, were you prepared to jump in and take the market share? When your factory burned down, were you prepared to come back and recover before your competitor could take your market share? So it's the preparation and the attitude that seems to matter more than the absolute luck, because the absolute luck evens out. And I am positing that this is the same is true for individuals. Unless you have really bad karma, in which case you want a different strategy. Unless you have really bad karma, all of us are going to have the same number of good luck events and the same number of bad luck events in our lives. So the difference is not that you are more lucky or you are more unlucky. The difference is what is the attitude with which you approach it. Are you prepared for it? And are you able to respond to it with a threat response and an opportunity response that shows your resilience to bounce back from a crisis? One of the insights, and I've said almost 40 years now, one of my insights is this, and my career has had many ups and downs along the way. The roots of my biggest successes were always in my biggest failures and biggest problems. So problems seem to have a role in your life by forcing you to look for opportunities to rise above the problem. So they're actually incredible opportunities for growth. So never waste a good crisis. Next chart. Next chart, please. Yeah. So this is a chart which is a summary made by a friend of mine on a Harvard Business Review article by Hermina Ibarra, who is a colleague at London Business School. And she's talking about how you can reinvent your career in disruptive times. I will not take you through this chart on an online forum because it's very complicated. I'll just request Ashish to share this chart together with the 10 rules of crisis. So these two charts he can share with you later and you can study it at leisure. It's quite well explained in this diagram drawn by Tanmay Vora. Next chart. So in finding, again, if you put all the points here, please. So this crisis is going to be a watershed moment. In our species history. And the question that we have to ask ourselves is, what is your legacy going to be as a company, as an individual? Because 20 years from today, when you look back, are you going to be proud of the choices that you have made today? It is a watershed moment, okay? Our choices, given the situations that we have been given, will be our test. And if you can go to the next chart, there's a very nice dialogue from Lord of the Rings when the first of the three, when they're stuck in the caves of Moria, where Frodo says, I wish the ring had never come to me. I wish none of this had happened. And Gandalf says, so do all who live to see such times. But that is not for them to decide. All we have to do is to decide what to do with the time that is given to us. So focus on what you can control and don't cry about the bad luck. So with that, I stop the presentation and I hand back for questions and answers.
Thank you, Nandu. Thank you very much for this lovely and very insightful presentation. There are great messages that we can take from this talk of yours. And for me, few things that stick with me is recognize the crisis, have a VG mindset, focus on what we can control, respond swiftly to threat and opportunity. Problems are opportunities to become better. I mean, there was so much for us to just take from this session. And I love the idea that you shared about this lady who was running a bar and converted into a grocery store so swiftly. And that talks about winning mindset. So, Nandu, the first question is always mine. You said you've been a Darth Vader in your earlier avatar, and you've been engaging with top leaders across different continents and different industries. So, my first question is that everyone has their take on role of a leader and traits of a leader. How do you define a leader, and how do you define leadership?
Rakesh, it's a big question, and it'll probably take half a day to answer it. So I'm not going to try to attempt a complete or a big answer. What I will say is this: more and more, when there is dramatic change happening around us, one of the core responsibilities of the leader is to prepare the organization for change. Okay? And this starts with a change mindset, preparing individuals. But when you have to prepare an organization for change, it's a lot to do with the culture of the organization, because the leader is the one who puts the culture in place, right? Who helps to nurture the culture, define the culture, protect the culture. So you have to define that culture, and then because that culture eventually determines how well your strategic response is to something. The culture determines at 6:30 p.m. on a Friday evening, how do you respond? Do you panic? Do you say, enough, I'm going for a long weekend? Or do you actually respond to it and get a team together and map out a thoughtful, urgent, but thoughtful response? So particularly in times of great change, particularly in a situation where black swan events can happen. Today it's COVID-19. Tomorrow it could be an earthquake. It could be the breakage of an undersea cable somewhere. Anything, or a global financial crisis. All kinds of crises can happen. So what we do know in business now, these will happen for sure, and they will happen with more frequency. The change is only going to accelerate going into the near future. So one of the most important tasks of leadership is to prepare the organization for change. And this starts with preparing yourself. Second, putting in place mechanisms to help people develop the right attitude and the right processes behind to cope with these crises when they happen. So just a short one-dimensional answer there.
Super. Thanks, Nandu. And I think our audience, Mr. Mehul Malhotra, possibly had some premonition, and the question nicely leads from what you just mentioned about change. So Mehul says that to win, you must change and innovate. change is tough. So in your opinion, how can companies establish a winning mindset based on innovation? Because it may not be enough to just put out statement and set up some governance meetings on ideas and so on and so forth. So what skills, structures, capabilities organizations need to introduce for that?
Yeah, very good question, Mehul. It's a difficult one. At a time like this, when there's so much disruptive change happening, and there's so many things that are, where is the next disruptive change going to come at you from? And I'm not sure if Keith Coates did his exercise with the self-driving cars with you guys, but it's amazing how change in one industry can ripple through a dozen unrelated industries. So how do you deal and how do you prepare for this change that's going to come from all directions? So the first thing to understand is that the role of strategic planning, so if you go back 30, 40 years, companies used to make these elaborate strategic plans that used to live in these big, thick, fat binders that stayed on the CEO's shelves. Those days are gone. Today, with so much change happening, it is folly to make a long-term strategic plan that is 5-10 years out. What more and more we need to do as leaders is build the culture and build the capabilities to digest and respond to change. Now, there are many ways of responding to change. Ideally, you are the disruptor. Brilliant. But if you're not the disruptor, what can you do? Well, you can copy the disruptor. You can be a me too. That's a strategy. It has worked in some cases, particularly if you can identify the disruptor in a limited geography before the disruptor has scaled up, and then you can able to take that disruption and run with it everywhere, not in an intellectual property theft, but whatever is public domain, if you can respond to that and build that into your business model. That's the second way. The third way is to disrupt the disruptor. The fourth way is to buy the disruptor. So there's a lot of strategic responses possible if you are not the disruptor. Ideally, you have to be the disruptor. In any of these responses, however, one core capability that we need to build is the ability to figure out which response is likely to work. And this basically means more and more strategy development is going to be a dynamic process where you first of all make sense of the environment around you, and identify all the changes that are happening, and then you make choices about which of these changes you want to respond to. You create a little pilot to respond to that change. You actually do it. Once you've done it, you figure out, is it working, is it not working, and go back and revise your plan and do this in an iteration. So increasingly, we need to build in the capability in companies for rapid experimentation, prototyping, learning with new business models. Not on a large scale, because if you don't do it in a large scale, you're committing immense resources behind a new opportunity that you're not even sure is going to be big. So focus your resources in small pilots where you can make mistakes at a relatively low cost, but take the learning. And when you know something works, then you scale it up bigger. And if that also works, you scale it up really big. So the capability at a strategic level that we need to build in companies is the capability to do rapid experimentation, rapid pilots, rapid failures, because failures are part of this, and learning. Rakesh.
Yeah, thanks, Nandu. And I'm going to dive into another interesting question. And it's nicely flowing out, these questions that I'm seeing from the topic that you were picking up. Rajit Mazumdar, basis, I think the topic that you just picked up, what would you advise traditional businesses to become tech-led, and bring innovation in the way they work? And this pandemic is showing that online is becoming really big, sort of disrupting everything, and ecosystems are becoming sort of more prominent and increasingly important to win the game. So what about businesses who remain brick and mortar, especially the smaller enterprises, retail stores, and so on and so forth? What should they be doing to deal with this situation?
Yeah, look, I think a very good message was from that lady: adapt, adapt, adapt. I experiment and pilot and see what you can do, what different. So it's as part of the same theme of building in the capability for rapid experimentation. Now, one interesting thing you mentioned, established companies and digital and how they should respond to digital. If you go back to the early 1900s, to the Spanish flu around that time, a lot of companies in New York at the time had a vice president of electricity. So if I say that to you today, vice president of electricity, you'll laugh. But in a way, isn't that what we are doing today? We are creating the vice president of digital transformation. And in 100 years from today, people are going to look back and laugh at that. Because digital is not a separate position. It is something, digital transformation has to happen fundamentally in every function of your value chain, and eventually in defining how the value chain services your customer and services their needs in a better way. So that's what we need. We need to build that digital transformation and thinking of the tools that are now available into every part of our value chain. And the only way you do this is by building this culture of rapid experimentation at every part of your value chain and decentralize it. You cannot drive this centrally. You cannot drive this top down. The culture has to be one that experiments continuously and learns. A great example in this context is 3M. Just look at 3M. It's one of the most innovative companies in the world, and they're able to build this into the culture and continuously come up with products that amaze us, delight us, surprise us, and in fact, benefit from this digital revolution. The digital revolution, for sure, is going to change our ways of working, much as electricity changed our ways of working. Video conferencing is a simple way, but exchanging information, blockchain ledgers, automation of jobs through software bots, through robots, and all this is even before we talk AI. The amount of disruption that's already possible is incredible, and it's immense. So this is going to happen, and companies that basically try to address this by setting up a vice president of digital transformation will probably fail. Companies that address this by setting up a capability and building experimentation into the culture have a better chance of doing something with it.
Excellent. That also addresses the question Shiv Kumar Swami asked. So I hope, Shiv Kumar, you got the answer to the question that you just posted, which is about how companies can do pilot, experiment, and be lean in terms of their experimentation. Okay, so before I get to the next question, a shout out to our audience. We've got about 5 to 10 minutes more with Nandu. Keep your questions coming in. I've got a bunch of questions here. You might still be the lucky one to get your question in. So please let it come to us. This one, Nandu, is from Sheila Ramkumar. And Sheila wants to know that this pandemic has unleashed a lot of chaotic messaging by brands and businesses, and everybody wanting to suggest that they're worried about customers' health and so on and so forth. But only a few of them actually strike the chord. So how would you recommend that brands and businesses communicate and engage with the customers, suppliers, distributors, and even employees in these times?
Look, communication is a lot about leadership and values and authenticity. So if you really have care for people, care for employees, care for consumers at the core of what you are doing, then you build that into your communication, and then you come across as authentic. You come across as somebody who really cares. So, and this is what leaders can do, and really by taking strong leadership stances. So a very good example is Lifebuoy. And Lifebuoy in India has had these set of communications where they've gone out and said, listen, wash your hands with any soap. They haven't said wash it with Lifebuoy. They said wash it with any soap, because just washing your hands for 20 seconds is what you need to do to get rid of the virus risk. So that is a leadership stance, that is authentic, that actually resonates, that actually builds trust. Okay, that's a very good way to actually communicate. Take a different situation on communication to employees. And in a tough situation, all companies, especially the ones on the left side of the chart, which are more affected by this COVID crisis, they are forced to cut costs. And cutting costs means renegotiating rentals, renegotiating fixed costs, but eventually also means looking at salary costs. Now, there are two different examples in the way people have done it. One is a company like Weight Watchers, where apparently all these, maybe I got the name wrong, I think it is Weight Watchers, who fired a lot of their staff all over a Zoom call. That's one extreme. On the other extreme, you have the way Uber and Airbnb did it. And they said, listen, we're going to take the pain at the top first, and then we're going to minimize the pain. And eventually, when we let you go, we're going to let you go with a lot of heart, with the best financial deal we can give you today. But we're also going to keep you on a list of people who we will hire back the moment our company bounces back. And in the meantime, we're willing to give you a reference to find a new job. Now, so there is no choice sometimes for companies. They have to cut costs. Otherwise, you have a Hertz-like bankruptcy. So if you don't want to go there, you have to cut costs. But then when you're communication to employees and you're doing it with a lot of heart, employees respect that. In my career, I have it's the hardest part in my career has been letting people go. And I have had to do it. I've had to close businesses. I've had to close factories. It was never easy. But I always did it myself. I looked people in the eye and I tried to respect them as individuals, as human beings, and not just treat them as a statistic and a number. Ultimately, the ultimate objective of everything we do as a corporate is to build trust. Trust with our employees, trust with our customers, trust with the stakeholders, the shareholders, the government, and everybody around you. And the only way to build trust is by showing genuine respect for the particular stakeholder you're dealing with. And if you don't have the genuineness of the respect behind your communication, very quickly your communication comes across as unauthentic or inauthentic, and then you lose trust. Rakesh, I hope that answered this, helped in this case.
Yes, it does. And I think I would just like to mention that in our previous session with Keith, I think he also spoke about this. So I would encourage the audience to go back and also listen to what Keith had to say about this. Is very similar to what Nandu just mentioned. So I'm sure you'll find it very useful. Okay, this next question, Nandu, is a little more, I think I've got time for a couple of more questions. So this next question is a little more macro level, and Suman Pramanik saying that we've seen this, exodus of labor back to rural areas in this pandemic situation. How do you see that shaping the business and industry? Is this something which is going to come back to what it was earlier, or you see that rural India is going to get the thrust as a result of what's happening in this situation?
I don't know enough to answer your question, nor can I speak for the Prime Minister and what he has in his mind. We do know that a lot of consumer behaviors are going to change permanently. A lot of companies have gone out and said that, they're going to mix working in an office with working remotely going forward. TCS, I think, said at one point of time that they would get people to come to office only 1 day a week and stay at home 4 days a week. Google has said that people don't need to come to office till July next year. So if you, and this may change, this will evolve, because office is also a social place where there's a lot of informal interaction outside of the structured formal interactions. So this may change, but indeed, if this is the case, then we can expect that there is going to be a dramatic reduction in office space, which will then lead to a dramatic reduction in real estate demand in the commercial area as more and more people discover online shopping, and the whole mix of interacting with something in an offline environment and coming and buying online. These behaviors, we are learning these new behaviors because of this crisis, and this is evolving and changing. This is going to have its impact and repercussions on a lot of jobs that were earlier performed by the less skilled, or what we call unskilled or unskilled labor. I don't like the word unskilled, but things like bricklayers, carpenters, etc. So their work will be affected. And one of the big challenges for us as a society is going to be to find jobs for these people, to find a way to re-educate these people. It's no accident that all over the world, people are starting now to talk about some kind of a universal basic income to help cover basic living costs for people. Because even when people go back to the rural areas, I hear stories now from Bihar and Uttar Pradesh that migrant workers who have gone back are now struggling because they don't have enough money, they don't have enough food, and they want to come back. At the same time, within the village, they found that there was a certain amount of social exclusion because of the fears of disease, etc. So we are a society in flux, and this is true of every single society all over the world. For us, the societal challenge and the governmental challenge actually is much deeper than the short-term economic challenge. And that is, if you recognize the nature of the fundamental transformation, and COVID-19 is only one part of it, the nature of the fundamental transition that is happening is a lot of jobs that we knew for the last 50 years are going to disappear. And when they disappear, what are people going to do? How do we re-educate them? How do we support them economically? And countries that are able to plan for that and prepare for that kind of migration of talent, those countries are actually better placed. So you talk about the digital divide. There is a digital divide. It's real, and it's going to now accentuate. So if you look at places like Singapore, doing a brilliant job. Okay, Singapore is a city state. Maybe it's easier for them to do it. It's more difficult for us at a continental country like India to do it. But nevertheless, that is the leadership challenge. That's not only for the short-term economy, but for the future of our people and their health and their well-being and their social development indices over the next 20, 30, 40 years.
Great. Nandu, I think 2 more questions. Do we have time for that? There are a bunch of them.
Let's take one last question maybe, and then we stop at that.
Sure. So then just give me a second. I'm going to ask you which question. There are lots of them on my screen right now. Okay, I think so this question possibly would be for all our audience who are in early part of their careers or wanting to get into the job market. So Nandu, what, according to you, since you're involved with academia, what are the skill set and capabilities that these folks must be focusing on? And what is your message for them in terms of building a career that they would want to be looking at building over the course of next 2 years?
Very good question. Very good question, Rakesh. Thank you. So, so if you look at this, we just spoke about the jobs of yesterday becoming obsolete going forward because the new nature of jobs is different. The kind of skills required are going to be very different. So at factory levels, there's roboticization happening in offices. There's software bots that are automating things like paralegal search, for example, which is discovery, which is part of the legal process. So a lot of existing professions are losing their relevance as we go into this new transformation with the digital changes that are happening around us. Keith Coates does this brilliant story of how self-driving cars can disrupt industries as diverse or occupations, starting from car drivers to traffic policemen, to insurance, to hospitals, and so on. So I've seen him do that exercise, and it's a brilliant exercise. So with so much change happening, what is the implication for jobs? The first implication is that the jobs of tomorrow are not the jobs of yesterday. The job of a digital marketer did not exist 20 years ago. Today it exists. It's big, right? The biggest companies in the world today did not exist 20 years ago. Today they are big. Amazon, e-commerce, Google, etc., Facebook. So if the jobs of tomorrow are different from the jobs of today, and probably many of them have not even been invented yet, then how do you prepare for those jobs? So the most important thing you need to think in your life is how to approach learning. In my generation, we were lucky because the rate of change was still relatively slow, and India was at the time a protected market for the first 20, 30 years of my career. And we could say, now I have done my engineering, now I've done my management education, now I can, padhai ho gayi. Today, you don't have that luxury anymore. The future belongs to lifelong learning. And the most important capability that you need to build today is understanding how to learn, so that you build lifelong learning into a regular part of your routine. Maybe it's daily, maybe it's weekly, maybe it's monthly. Maybe you learn by watching videos. Maybe you learn by reading a book. Maybe you learn by talking. Maybe you learn by doing. Figure out your preferred learning style and build a learning routine into your daily, weekly, monthly, annual routine. Because you will need to re-skill yourself, not just once, but probably 4 or 5 times in the course of your career. And this re-skilling calls for learning agility. It calls for the ability to deal with dramatic, disruptive change. So even employers more and more are going to look for these capabilities. Are you able to demonstrate these capabilities? Do you show the initiative to go out and learn in an informal, unstructured environment to build your own skill set and bring that skill set back into your current job? So that's my biggest learning for you. Your degree is not what's going to give you lifelong employment. It is not, because your degree is teaching you the skills for yesterday's jobs. It is important. It is not enough. It is not sufficient. To have a lifelong employment, you need to build, the most important skill you need to build is learning how to learn and building an appetite for learning. Rakesh.
Thank you, Nandu. Thank you very much for your time today. That was absolutely extraordinary listening to you. I'm sure audience would have loved it as well. Nandu, before we sign off for the day, any messages that you want to relay in terms of how people can get in touch with you or your work? Where can they reach out to?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So thank you, Rakesh, for asking that question. So there is the second last chart, or the last chart, Ashish, in my presentation, if you can put it up. So I have actually launched a YouTube channel. It's called Insights with Nandu. If you go on YouTube and you search for Insights with Nandu, there it is on your screen. Insights with Nandu. If you search for this, you will find it. I basically am putting up short format videos on this, about 10 minutes average, between 7 to 15, but average 10 minutes. The link is also there, and Ashish can share this slide also with you as a takeaway. In general, I don't share my PowerPoint slides, so the PowerPoint slides will not be shared. But the 3 slides I mentioned, the 10 crisis management rules, the learning paradigms by Hermina Ibarra, and this 8 memoir can be shared. In this, the second link here is a link directly to a 15-minute video on the same channel on crisis management. So these are both 8 memoirs for you. The first link, you will find several videos. Next week, in the next few days, I'm going to be posting a video on diversity and inclusion, how to break the glass ceiling, which may be interesting to many of you, and I'm sure will be a topic that will invite a lot of discussion and comments. But from my experience, I'm sharing my views. So this is a good way to follow. Apart from this, if you wish, you could follow on LinkedIn, or you could join ISB. And if you join ISB, then you get access to a lot of world-class professors, and including and also you get access to an alumni network that is global, that is 60,000 people strong. So courses like what I spoke to you just now, we have a lot of such courses, a lot of such education that are both offered inside the school and also offered as open programs for executive education and so on. So ISB is a great place to come to if you want to connect and learn more.
Super, thank you, Nandu. And I have seen those bite-sized videos that Nandu spoke of. They're extremely useful in between our meetings when we get time to transition. It's always a good idea, to just refer to some of those, and then nuggets of wisdom that all of us can use and benefit from. Once again, thank you very much, Nandu, for being on the show. It meant a lot for us. A lot of learning in there from what you just spoke about, and I'm sure all of us who've been listening to this show really and hugely benefited from this session. So thank you very much, and wish you all the best, sir.
Thank you, Rakesh, and thank you, Ashish, for all the assistance with the technology.
Okay, so that brings us, so Shiv Kumar, from what Nandu just said about where you can reach out for more inputs and more content around the question that you posted, you can follow Nandu and get answers to some of your questions which were unanswered over here, perhaps. Okay, so that brings us to the end of this session. Another very insightful session. I thoroughly enjoyed listening to Nandu. There is so much of learning in these sessions, all the sessions that we've done in the past. I look forward to hosting these, and I hope, all of us hope, from Futures in Early India Life Insurance, that you who are listening to this session are finding these very useful. We're getting an amazing response from our audience. So thank you very much for being with us, joining these sessions, encouraging us to keep going. These are tough times. This is the community work that we're doing. All of us can come together to do good for all of us, to become better and create a better place, for all of us together. So time for me to pick two lucky questions. It would be, I had marked them, so it would, where is it gone? Okay, so Suman Pramanik, who asked about, this transition to rural, which Nandu is one of the last questions that we asked of Nandu. And the other is Ritika Katuria, who asked the question around skills and capabilities that you would need to build for future. So thank you very much, Ritika. Thank you very much, Suman, for being with us. Give us your email IDs. Don't forget to do that, because the voucher can only be emailed to you. Okay, so before I sign off, of course, as always, a big shout out and thank you to our community support partner, Resultix, AdGully, Netcore, and Paul Reiter for being with us all through last few months and spreading the message, taking it across to such a wide audience. And of course, our knowledge partner, ET Brand Equity. You can sort of go back to ET Brand Equity, see the excerpts of these conversations, or you can go on our social page and get more details of all the sessions that we have done in the past. Join us next week. The next session is on 5th of August. Doyen of leadership in the industry globally, Rita McGrath, is going to be here. We followed Rita for I know how many months, and she agreed to do this session. We are so honored to have her with us next week, 5th of August, 6:30 p.m. Don't miss that session, because that's something that you don't want to miss. So, okay, with that, thank you very much for joining us. Hope to see you guys again next week. Stay safe, stay healthy.